the assigned readings, and I'm going to give you a choice. Well, actually not a choice because I know what I'm prepared for. And so the assigned readings talk and go into a whole lot of detail about Kemet, and then ends with the river kingdoms, which, again, when you're just trying to dispel the myth of the dark continent of Africa and people living in grass huts and skirts and all that kind of stuff. And you have to do a similar thing with Native Americans. No, Native Americans didn't live in teepees. Some built pyramids or pyramid cities as well at the same time or a little later in time than the ones in Africa. And basically you still have to have the same level of social organization that you're reading about in present-day Kemet, about, wow, bureaucracy, and yeah, the longest government in human history, which, has a trading relationships with most of the rest of the planet, including here, Turtle Island. Though Molefi doesn't necessarily go into that aspect, there are other writers that do, even going so far as to create fictional works, which may or may not see the light of day, but one of my favorite along the lines of, in terms of historical fiction, science fiction, parallel universes, and all that. So two separate works. Stephen Barnes wrote 2 books, Lion's Blood and I'm forgetting the other one, but basically it's an alternative history of what if Islamic Muslims discovered America before Columbus and had the same influence. And basically one of the things that Stephen does is he kind of flips the script in terms of, well, one of the principal characters in his book, besides on the African side, where basically they're in Texas and Louisiana, but they're not going into Mexico because the Aztecs are pretty formidable. They're not going to let anybody conquer their country. But, they carve out this uneasy alliance by enslaving white people, and they use Vikings as the slavers to enslave people from Ireland and England, and then import them over to America to work for the black Muslims, who basically force you to speak Arabic and convert to Islam, and your pagan religion or whatever gets pushed to the side, et cetera, et cetera. So what does the world look like from that particular book? And he creates 2 books like that. Then there's another one basically called The Spirit of Memnon. It's or Shades of Memnon. It's a trilogy in which it talks about ancient Egypt and then moves over to America, where Memnon, so Memnon was an actual person. The reason I can say, for example, that when we're talking about Trojan horse warfare, so in case, I haven't explained that here yet, right? Okay. So a Trojan horse in cybernetics is like a virus. It's a piece of malware. It is basically, you're sent a link to a place that basically downloads a bunch of viruses to your computer, and that's a Trojan horse because you think it's okay. But it comes from the Trojan War, where a group of Greeks, in order to assail the city of Troy, basically, they've lost the battle, but then they leave this gift of a giant wooden horse with, part of their army left inside. It's brought in as a gift inside the wall of Troy. Then at night, the small strike force comes out and, lays open the walls of Troy, and then, the city falls, right? So that led to the saying, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, all right? And so one of the stories of that is basically is one of those epic Greek poems, like Homer's The Iliad or the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, which is basically, I believe, the story of Troy. But the Aethiopis, okay, is the story of Troy told not only from the point of view, but including the story of Memnon and the honorable Ethiopians. And Memnon was considered, he was basically the son of a mortal man and the Eos, the goddess of dawn. And he went up against Achilles' army. He gets killed by Achilles. His mom appeals to Zeus. Wait, you said my son wasn't going to be killed. He got killed by Achilles, who then himself was killed. So bring him back. So Zeus brought him back. And then it was then told within these particular stories, Shades of Memnon, that he then made a journey west of the Pillars of Hercules. So, which means here, Turtle Island, right? Atalanta, as it's called in Egypt, that is water and metal. So the mythical land of Atlantis is actually in this story, Turtle Island, North, Central, and South America, and the pyramid cities there. And talking about a world war that happened in 1500 BC, fought with the Vikings and Africans and other folks. Anyway, interesting mythology, but we don't necessarily think of that because that's not written into the history. But the point being of the readings is like, okay, look at the details of what it is to create a bureaucratic society. So I had thought earlier of, well, I could build a lecture around that, or I could build a lecture that helps you understand your world coming out of that. So that's what I'm proposing to do. But a Trojan horse, right? The basic idea is that it's a weapon disguised as a gift. Does this work? Trojan horse. So whether that's cybernetics or Greek warfare, it's a weapon disguised as a gift. So, to diffuse the weapon, you have to recognize first that it is a weapon, how it works, how it's vulnerable, and how it can be made useful. Not as a weapon, is what I'm thinking about here. So you can think of curriculum as a weapon. Okay? The Columbus discovered America narrative is a weapon. And so, currently when, we're going on, I can just describe the ongoing struggle here around cultural competency between various factions, and, where the predictable resistance is coming from and where it's not. People don't feel they want this diversity stuff thrown down their throat when the diversity that we're talking about is people that look like them, that are different from them, right? So it's white faculty largely resisting the effort, which is now not so much about, okay, you need to learn how to deal with brown people. You need to learn to deal with the white people whose experience are different from you, that come from traumatic environments, like combat vets, like prison, people coming from prison, people coming from domestic violence, people coming from poverty, which is not an accident and not a failure of them, but is structured and patterned. That's why Martin Luther King said what he said, poverty is violence. And it's not about black people anymore. There has to be a war on poverty that is basically lifting everybody up, because it's not just about us, it's about everybody that isn't in a position of power, which is lots of folks. That's what made him precisely more dangerous. Yeah, Eddie.
diversity, you're saying, really isn't necessarily related to color.
No.
It's much, much broader.
Oh, much, much broader. But,
It's
one of the ways of, the training wheel way of seeing it is you look for the obvious discriminators, right? And so in terms of the case law, in terms of practice here, race and racism and class and gender and all these other interrelated concepts, are part of that large rubric. And then there's also the invisible stuff. So, I, as a drug counselor, basically deal with people who come from cultures based on trauma. All right, so if I have, sitting in my office, this remarkable meeting of 4 combat veterans, okay, but only one has been in the military. Again, he's a Marine. The other is a former Crip from, Houston, a Hell's Angel enforcer, and yet a homegrown gang member from Eugene. And they're basically talking about their experience in combat and war and the people they've lost, et cetera, et cetera. Now, can your average English teacher who grew up in Eugene, went to the U of O, understand their experience of even the person from Eugene? It's a stretch. Okay, even though, except for, the Crip, everybody else is white. Right, so do they get that? No. So just saying, look, part of your curriculum has to address their particular world. So I can tell you about ancient Egypt, obviously because I selected books that, okay, this is not in your traditional canon, but many of the features that you're reading about in this society you can see reflected here. Right? And so when I talk about Trojan horses, that's an analysis that comes from essentially looking at the African experience and saying, okay, so black people understand Trojan horses and weapons instead disguised as gifts because we were at Troy and we saw it. Native people, Native Americans, did not see that. So they're not going to see the typhoid blankets because that's not in their warfare. If you're going to go to battle with somebody, you don't want your opponent weaker than you. You want your opponent strong, right? And yeah, you can use trickery, et cetera, but you want to be able to be a good, clean, honest victory if there's going to be a victory, if it has come to that to begin with. You're not necessarily going to do winning at all costs. You're not going to do winning at the cost of your honor or dishonoring the enemy, because you're going to have to live with the enemy unless you wipe them out, which we didn't believe in genocide, so, right. So Trojan horse warfare. So we'll come to this when we talk about what happened with natives and why the natives had to be destroyed by America. But basically, there are 3 tests which are sent from an African American analysis that come to Native people in order of appearance: the Bible, the bottle, and the casino. Okay, they're Trojan horses. Weapons disguised as gifts. Okay, so the Bible is the King James Version of the Bible, not the original African version of Christianity, but one changed for a weapon of conquest. 2, the bottle, a form of a drug that some natives knew, but it was stronger than the ones they knew. So basically being the difference between having coca leaf and being used to that form of cocaine and introducing crack. Okay, so the difference between beer and wine strength alcohol, if you have it, and then fire water. Profound difference. So you can use those particular drugs as weapon. And then the casino, which is basically depending on a form of economy, which is not just money, but money is the obvious thing to look at, which creates disparities. It creates unequalness. So you're accepting this form of gambling, because natives did have forms of gambling, but you wouldn't lose your house doing it. You wouldn't lose your livelihood. Okay? You wouldn't, it wouldn't become a form of addiction. But then having to accept that in order to be able to make some economic theoretically some economic gains for your tribe, except that in doing so, you give up a piece of your sovereignty, and the reality happens that most of the jobs that are going to the casino owners and the casino workers are not benefiting the tribe. So at one point, there was a financial analysis done that showed the profit that actually went to Indian tribes from all casinos was 10 billion a year. And I mean only 10 billion. Okay? And at the time, the same time, comparable time with Black America at that point was, if you just considered our discretionary spending at the time, we were the 9th largest economy in the world after California. Right? And now it's, our discretionary spending is over $1 trillion, but still lots of us are in poverty, whatever. So the only reason I'm saying all this stuff is to say, look, there's an infrastructure that came based on a story that was told, policies that were built, some of which started in Egypt, though they're not necessarily credited there, in the time period that you're reading in Asante. But I want to explicitly talk about your world. Now, the world that forces us to speak English and have a certain history and a certain belief system. So, let's see. Let's talk about Western civilization. Coming back? Coming back?
So I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Do they, what, do you think that the natives still don't recognize casinos as a Trojan horse, or aren't they still being built? Like,
some do, some don't. That preceding analysis
hasn't entered their epigenetics yet to recognize that?
Well, there's a whole piece around. What does it take to recover from genocide. And when you have that ability to recover from genocide, what are the first things that you attend to? So that analysis about 3 tests that came to Indian people came from a native elder. And the analysis that I applied to it as a Trojan horse is basically from Maroon training. Like, yeah, that's right. 3, okay, if we say that, Red Indian says Bible, bottle, casino, then what does that look like? Well, it's a Trojan horse. So what form of the Bible? What kind of, why is the bottle an issue? Why is the casino an issue? Because of the things that they have to do to essentially achieve, say, cultural equity is one way of looking at it. This is interesting. The machine, I guess what I could do as a backup, since the Mac seems to be having conniption fits, is go PC.
So we seem to have lost your connection to the
Yeah.
system. Did you change resolution by any chance?
I didn't.
Okay. No signal.
No signal. Oh, let's take it
Try
out of
your
this.
displays. Ooh, spinning wheel of death. Now you've really done it.
I've really done it. Uh-oh. Okay.
I suggest it's an issue with your,
Computer.
your output, your
Okay.
displays.
All right. So what resolution should I be picking?
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll know it when it comes up.
Yeah. 8x6. Okay, there it is. There we go. Okay. All right. Saved.
Sigh of relief.
All right, Western civilization. This is from my American Heritage Dictionary, which is one of my favorite because it's so typical. So Western, found in or typical of countries, especially in Europe and North and South America. Now that's an interesting piece, North and South America, whose culture and society are greatly influenced by traditions rooted in Greek and Roman culture and in Christianity. Huh. Greco-Roman Christianity in South America? Huh. Okay. Interesting. Well, American Heritage Dictionary. Okay. Found in or belonging to the non-communist countries of Europe and North and South America during the Cold War. Oh, I see you're frowning. Okay, that is i.e. the so-called First World. Right? That is the communist countries being the Second World, and then the emerging developing nations being the Third and or Fourth World. Located in or relating to Europe and North and South America. Western civilization. Based on, consisting of, or resembling the teachings, practices, and beliefs of Roman Catholicism and Protestantism as opposed to those of the Eastern churches. Now, you noticed the other day when I was basically making a point about the quote from the patriarch of the Eastern Church, who based their teachings and religious principles on the Peshitta, as opposed to the Latin side of the church? All right, so yeah, this is my onboard Microsoft World English Dictionary, Encarta World English Dictionary, Microsoft Corporation. So, in ethnic studies, Western means white, and white means non-ethnic, and white is what's referred to as normal. So, for example, then whose food is in the ethnic food section, so your supermarket. Whose history is told, when you're told about history. When Chief Gates said, normal people are not killed by carotid holds by LAPD, who did he mean? I mean, and that was the quote, normal people. He meant white is normal. And if you can't trust the chief of police of the LAPD to define who normal is, then who are you going to call? So school, one function of school is to socialize you to function in a society based on Western civilized values, which operate from certain assumptions. Okay? Tonto. So not the Johnny Depp Lone Ranger, but the original one. And this is a joke coming out of Indian country, so just bear in mind that's the point of view. Tonto, we're surrounded by Indians. What do you mean we, white man? So, ethnic studies, of course, it questions those assumptions and attempts to tell a different story, which includes ethnic-specific points of view. And so we assume you to have been given the point of view of Western civilization, so we kind of retell the story, including the point of view of at least the people we're studying in particular from an emic point of view. Did we talk about emic and etic? No? Okay. All right. So, anthropology in Western civilization. It's the scientific discipline and field within the traditional canon in which other cultures and their artifacts are studied, generally from the point of view of Western civilization. Anthropology studies other cultures, but the culture which generates anthropology remains itself unstudied. Okay? So notice that trick, at least until recently postmodern. And postmodern is basically after World War II, when it became more fashionable to like, wait, let's question this lens because we're thinking we're superior. So, etic, this is in anthropology, is the position in anthropology it usually takes. Etic assumes an objective position outside of the culture being studied. So we're not influenced by the culture. We're seeing it as an objective, from an objective point of view, not understanding that the position that we're in is itself a biased cultural point of view. Okay? And the etic position describes what is going on from the point of view of the anthropologist and the anthropologist's culture, but of course without examining those cultural biases. And there are cultural biases, of course, one way or the other. I mean, not necessarily. When the subject of bias comes up, I take the audio point of view. That is, in the old cassette tapes, you want high bias tape because high bias tape captures more information than low bias tape, right? And digital basically captures even more information, but sometimes, it's certainly in the recording process, you have to add back in the warmth that people are expecting to listen to in music and other things. So, etic, this is from the dictionary. Making use of pre-established categories for organizing and interpreting anthropological data rather than categories recognized within the culture being studied. Okay, so anthro takes the etic, when anthro is taking the etic point of view, it's basically taking pre-established things that seem normal, relevant, useful from the culture that's generating anthropology, not studying what the culture being studied thinks is important or salient. Yeah.
So it's from without and from above.
Yes. Yeah, that is the position, from without and from above. Emic, relating to the analysis of structural and functional elements of language or behavior, culture, relating to the organization of interpretation of data that makes use of the categories of the people being studied. So internal. All right, so I often use, by translating this in the ethnic studies way to psychology, and basically, which is basically studying, well, literally, in Egypt, the Greek word for psychology, psyche, literally meant soul. So if you read psychology literally, it's the study of the soul. Okay? But in Western psychology, it's the study of the mind. The soul we leave to religion. But in Egypt, they're the same thing. You can't study the mind without studying the soul. But, you know, you can see the cultural shift. So, when I talk about etic in psychology, that's stereotypes. And now I'm twisting emic and saying inside the culture is archetypes. Okay? Because they're coming from within. They're deep structures coming from within, and I'm simply morphing that concept from Jungian psychology, and basically saying, okay, there are structures inside the culture that generate behavior in response to survival needs. Another culture seeing those same activities and behaviors may stereotype them. Okay, so let's take food. A basic culinary stereotype about African Americans. Don't be PC. Go for it.
Fried chicken or watermelon?
Fried chicken and watermelon. Okay? All right? Now, that's the stereotype, right? But it is based in a reality. And here's the deep reality where it came from. All right? Where watermelons came from originally, and where did chickens come from originally? Okay, so here's the thing. There is, in the early feminist era, when they were basically talking about, when you have an anonymous quote, a quote by Anonymous is a woman. Because you sure know the man ain't going to leave their story out. Right? So a lot of times, not every time, don't want to appear biased, but if you don't know the origin of something, probably came from people of color a long time ago. All right? So the genetic descendant of your modern chicken is the Guinea jungle fowl from Africa. Okay? Where watermelons came from? 6,000 to 7,000 years ago in Africa, southern Africa. So notice where watermelons are grown. They love heat. Love heat. Here in Oregon, they're like grown in like Hermiston, Pendleton, high desert, hot. Okay? So think about if you wanted to, there's no hiking trails from southern Africa to northern Africa. Because you got a big ass jungle in the middle and all that other kind of stuff. But if you were going to try and walk it along the beach or whatever, along the coast, the way the Awe did, because who the Awe are, when you encountered the Awe in West Africa, basically they say, our original home was those biblical cities in Iraq. And we were chased out. So we basically traveled along the coast, getting accepted or rejected by various other places, and we're fishermen, and now we're in Ghana, Togo, Benin, doing our fisherman thing. But we're from those biblical cities in Iraq, and it's taken us this long to basically tell our story, et cetera, right? So there is migration across the continent, but my basic point is, archetypally, if you want to cross a desert and there is no REI, you're going to need a canteen, right? Think a watermelon would make a great canteen? Yeah. Stores water, electrolytes, et cetera, And if you have agriculture and you can press grain into oil, and you have fire and iron, fire, iron, skillets, birds that are abundant, chickens, whatever.
Opposite food.
Hello. Fried chicken and watermelon. Okay? So yeah, that's us. Yeah, we discovered watermelon. Hello, we cultivated watermelon. We brought chicken to you. As well as a bunch of other things, just like the Indians brought potatoes and peppers and all that other kind of stuff. Okay? So we had trading relationship with them. So, right. Okay? So I'm just saying, in terms of the archetype, yeah, of course. Watermelon and fried chicken. Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm just saying. All right? So, and then this becomes a negative stereotype. Whereas, people don't want their connection to Africa or whatever. So all I'm saying in terms of looking at the stereotypes that Western civilization has about other people, so understand Western civilization as it stands, depending on how you define it, is like 1,000 years old. And I'm being charitable by even giving them 1,000 years old. From, coming out of the Dark Ages. That's what I'm counting from. Because the Western civilization, they say, ancient Greece and, the Romans. No, you fell, you went through Dark Ages, but nobody else went through Dark Ages. Just y'all. And we helped come bring you out of that. So, you're welcome again. But so, back to slide, if you would. Thank you. So Afrocentric is not ethnocentric. So ethnocentrism, a belief or assumption in the superiority of your own social or cultural group, is usually used in a disapproving context. So Afrocentric, as I'm defining it, because individual practitioners will basically define it slightly differently, but I'm pretty much in line, mainstream Afrocentric, probably a little towards the more radical side, really, but the idea is a multiplex emic viewpoint seeking to understand a point of view from within the particular culture's point of view. So not just black people, but from inside the cultural point of view of who we're studying. So if an Afrocentric person is going to study Eurocentrism or Western civilization, why'd they get the way they got? Where'd they come from? And what's the story that they tell them about themselves, and what's the real story? Or a different story, right? So an Afrocentric approach then seeks to form the basis for lasting action and social change towards a greater level of justice. Yeah?
It just seems there's this constant, endless cycle of, a white Western civilization trying to take the claim for things for which they have no right to take the claim.
Sure.
So why is that? Is there some kind of inherent fear? I think
Well,
it's a sense of their own inferiority, and they're trying to make up for it.
So there is that. So I naturally, growing up with Afrocentric folks and various Afrocentric thinkers who are also psychologists, trying to figure out, okay, so the basic question that I had to look at 7 is, okay, who puts a cigarette in a kid's hoodie at 7 in Disneyland? Why do they hate us so much? What did I do? Right? So what's the fear? So various people break it down different ways. Some people say envy, some people say fear of annihilation. If you study white supremacists who are I had somebody in my office, a few weeks ago that was trying to tell me that you can make donations to Planned Parenthood to provide abortions for specific ethnic groups, like today. Now, okay, back in the day, Planned Parenthood was about eugenics, 50 some odd years ago. Sure, it was. Not today. But, he was also talking about, the NRA supporting stand your ground rights for African American. Really? Because when we stand our ground, we get killed. But, okay. Proud gun owner and all that kind of stuff. I'll believe what you want to believe. But part of his worldview was also the idea that the reason you bomb abortion clinics is because white women are some of the highest consumers of abortion services, and they think that that's genocide. In fact, when the head of the Florida Ku Klux Klan says, lesbian Jew nurses are killing white babies. Wait. Lesbian Jew nurses are providing abortions to kill white babies, and you're the Klan. Okay, so how many lesbian Jew nurses are? Okay, if you're looking for logic, all right, if this is what you're saying to the public press, then okay, you believe it, or you want people to believe it, or your audience is somebody that believes like you. The rest of us may, put that somewhere, but okay, so is the fear of annihilation, racial annihilation, there? Because, white people emerged 22,000 years ago in the same configuration that we got black people starting out, 250,000 years ago, and then Asians, then, natives, et cetera, et cetera. And white people are the last phenotype to emerge 22,000 years ago. Okay, so nobody's actually trying to eliminate white people. And race mixing, we've been doing that for 22,000 years. Why are y'all tripping now? And yes, you're the last phenotype to emerge, white people. Nobody's trying to eliminate you. But you are in the minority planet-wide. That's always been the case. And nobody's tried to make a concerted effort to get rid of you, except like Hitler. your own folks. Why are you tripping about us? But, okay. That psychology, if you point it to Western psychology, okay, there's a inferiority complex, there's a little paranoia. What is it? I can play it lots of different ways, but then there's the person in front of you that I'm trying to get off speed or meth, and let's get you off meth so you can think right. So, there's a term in Portuguese, conscientização, which is learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and to take action against the oppressive elements of reality. And there isn't really an equivalent in English, so that's why I use this, because it works. And Paulo basically, he wrote a couple of books, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So pedagogy is basically how you organize a curriculum to teach. So not only what you teach, where you start, scope and sequence, and what are the subjects that you can talk about. And when he's talking about the pedagogy of the press, he's basically saying, what we would call in America the school of hard knocks. When I was talking about the diversity efforts here, look, white people, did I use that, what was once done to us because of race? Right, okay, so, what the guy took offense to in that statement was essentially white people being treated like black people used to be treated. And you don't like being treated like the N-word. Well, neither did we, but guess what? It's happening to you, and it's always been happening to you, and you've just kind of been deluded that it isn't, or that you can feel better because you're white. But maybe whiteness is not what you should be looking at. So, in terms of mastery, because this will be a discussion about learning to understand how our equal plights, stereotypes, archetypes work. In chiefless societies before the rise of Egypt, that age grade system gave an individual the skills for self-mastery. That is, self-knowledge, self-control, and thus self-worth, and then extending that, royal worth. And once you had those things internally, then you are responsible, or able to respond, if you like, or respondability, if you like it that way, for those younger and responsible to those older. And you demonstrated that mastery by your daily conduct in human relations within a village or community. So mastery was self-mastery, self-control, policing yourself, as it were. So you could become a leader, and anyone could become a leader, even a slave, by demonstrating an ability to unify people and to serve their needs before your own. And this is considered royal worth. So this was the basis for determining who was royal before there were chiefs. And this is thought to be a spiritual quality which is passed on from parents to children, i.e. royal blood, and of course you had to behave as if you had some sense of self. You didn't get extra points because of your mom and daddy. So slavery in this context, a person who could not control themselves or chose not to. They did not heed the teachings of their elders or community. They acted selfishly without honor or a sense of justice. Their physical animal nature ruled them rather than the divine spiritual nature ruling their animal impulses. So, and if a conflict between nations led to war, that is, there's a whole sidebar about warfare, which we talked about the other day. The losing side got to collect their dead and wounded and withdrew from the battlefield. People who were abandoned or otherwise captured became slaves. Because if your own side didn't want you, then okay, we're not gonna kill you, but we'll take you in. But because we're taking you in and you're in the enemy's camp, you have the right to the same access to education and self-improvement that others have in our tent. Right? So, a slave had the right to earn their freedom, and through education, demonstrated self-mastery and developed their self-worth, the same as any other person. They were allowed access to education. So, for example, in pre-conquest Africa, same rights to courtesy as an enemy could expect in the village. But you still had to be polite, because you never know who is connected to who, and which enemy might become an ally. You know, hence, the enemy of my enemy is my friend doesn't mean your enemy's enemy will always be your friend, or that your enemy will always be your enemy. Sometimes your ally can be an enemy too, conditionally. So, today, a slave can generally be defined as, in economic terms, as a person who is forced to work exclusively for minimal room or board. Could also be sex slavery, exploitation, sexual tourism. It could be considered a form of bondage if you're basically, forced to stay in a place and serve the tourists who come to have sex with you. And again, there has been sexual tourism, is still sexual tourism. Slavery, historically. Slaves historically in Africa were captives of war. They could be any race, and it was only in the European colonies in Turtle Island that chattel slavery, that is human as property, slavery came to be populated exclusively by one race. So, any African captive of war could be enslaved. And Africa, again, where 600 to 2,000 languages were spoken, average black African person, even today, can speak at least 5. Not surprising if they speak 3, but definitely the average I found is 5 here. So this is also the case with African slaves brought here. So, let's see, I think I want not to go here. So, part of the stories that haven't been told yet. Did we talk about hidden curriculum? Okay. Partially we did, but
Second week, I think.
yeah. But basically, hidden curriculum is not only what you teach, but the order in which you teach it. That's an Egyptian yoga sequence. That's the writing sequence. We did the Egyptian calendar. All right, this is where we stopped. So I'm going to pick up here. Okay, because it represents part of your world. What happened? So, those of you in a Christian framework, what are the last words on the cross attributed to Yeshua, also known as Jesus?
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
That's one of the last words. What else? Very last words before he died. Starts with Father, Father, too.
Let this cup pass from me. That was the Garden of Eden.
That's Gethsemane.
Gethsemane.
Not bad.
For this I was kept one?
Yeah, that's what the actual words were, but I'll just stop this little game. So, for this I was kept, but that's not what's taught in the traditional canon. Okay, what the traditional canon says is, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? So this is actually came from a parallel chapter of Matthew, where basically there's 5 different Aramaic scholars, and only one of the Aramaic scholars is a native speaker, and basically takes the book of Matthew line by line, 5 different translators giving you comparisons, and so the only one who's a native speaker comes up with this translation: Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, for this I was kept or spared. This was my destiny. Because you saw basically the multiple translations possible from the Lord's Prayer, right? So it's the same, applying that same sensibility here. Not Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? Father, Father, for this I was kept. So mastery, not despair. Self-mastery, triumphant strength under pain and suffering. So part of that, again, taking that narrative and taking that position that's archetypal. All right? What kind of culture then produces an individual capable of essentially withstanding torture and maintaining their spiritual focus? That's not necessarily what's been revealed or being revealed in the Western canon at all. So Du Bois, one ever feels his two-ness, both an African, a Negro, and an American. So while we focus sometimes on names and dates, as you've been formatted to in Western history, we don't always do that. So I've been teaching you to analyze from kind of an Afrocentric perspective, giving you hidden constructs and reference, that the same person who's a slave could actually be a scientist in his own culture, but not necessarily be recognized. He could be an inventor, he could be an iron worker, he could be a historian, he could be lots of different things. Yeah?
So a slave was simply someone captured as a result of losing a battle, but they weren't considered inferior.
Right. No, they weren't.
Circumstantial.
Right. Yeah. So, but that was one of the things that I noticed in Africa, meeting with all these chiefs, and even though it's like a tourist thing, they're saying, yeah, thank you for making the trip back to your home. This is your home. But I want you to put slavery out of your mind. Just put it out of your mind. Well, no, we ain't going to do that. Sorry. We're not going to forget slavery. Don't ask us to forget slavery. In fact, from our point of view, why did you sell us into slavery? Like your own people, like Muslims, selling Muslims. My great-grandmother was a Muslim from Morocco. So how'd she get sold into slavery in America? How do you think that was a good idea? Oh, well, we didn't think that they were going to treat you badly. What, really? You didn't think that? Wow. How could you? Oh, you never even asked. So it was just like we weren't part of your tribe, we were captured or whatever, or we were sold, and that was it? Sold for whiskey or guns or whatever? No, we're not forgetting that. Sorry. All right, so the scientist slave, the free person genius can be the same person. And then there is genius within the slave. But that might not necessarily be recognized. So this is from, Nitarianism, basically coming out of an African context, and Yeshua being trained in Nitarianism, and it's an African religion, is going to have a sacred phenomenon. So father, mother, and child and the child of true humanity, a hero, the child of true humanity, that's the actual Trinity, not Father, Son, Holy Ghost. So this depiction of Osar or Osiris, Oset, and Heru. So the names aren't necessarily matching who that is. So on screen right is Oset, which is rendered into the Greek language Isis. The middle, in the child role, is Osar, also known as Osiris, because he was killed by his evil brother, and he had to be remembered. And his evil brother scattered all the parts of his body all over the planet. And so Isis and her son, their son Horus, or Heru, where we get the word hero, had to go around and find all the pieces of his body and remember him. Okay, so to remember is to put things together that have been scattered. All right, so the Father, Mother, the Trinity, basically Mother, Father, and the child of true humanity. This is a cover from Prayers of the Cosmos in Aramaic. Yeshua, Father, Mother, child of true humanity. Yes. So, the egg that Miriam of Magdala, also known as Mary Magdalene. In some stories, she lived, she had kids with Jesus. And those kids, that bloodline is called the Merovingians. So in case you were wondering where that came from in the Matrix, there is an actual sect of Christianity that believes they worship the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and that the royal blood or the spiritual blood follows that bloodline. Now, one of the pieces that goes along with that particular thing, that icon, Miriam Magdala, she was basically traveling and basically talking about a Roman, talking to having dinner at a Roman official's house, and she was talking about how badly Jesus was treated, and he basically said, well, and she had been there at the resurrection, and the Roman general said, well, a man can't rise from the dead. A man can no more rise from the dead than that egg turned color, and the egg immediately turned red. That's what this icon is indicating. That's that particular story, right? So her being able to also achieve miracles and her being placed within this particular worldview of, okay, she and Jesus were married, had children, because in that particular framework, a rabbi, they don't believe in celibacy. And you can't be a rabbi, you might be able to be a rabbi and be single, but then how can you marry people, and then how can you counsel married people without understanding the full spectrum of experience? So yeah, you have to be married. And so one of the stories within the worldview that accepts that Yeshua and Mary Magdalene were husband and wife, or companions, that is, they broke bread together, all right? And in the sense of the world, they're married, they're husband and wife, is that in his culture, it's the groom that supplies the wine for the wedding feast. So the water into wine at a wedding was his wedding. And so no wine? I got this. So Christ means the anointed one. He anointed my head with oil. The oil refers to neurotransmitters, as we call them today, secreted by the pineal gland, which supports spiritual vision. The gland is stimulated when you turn your two eyes to focus on the third eye point. And so there's that line in Matthew about the light of the body is in the eye. Therefore, when your eye is single, your body is full of light. Makes sense from a yogic point of view. Two eyes roll up to focus on the one. Your body's full of light. So, Naeem Akbar made a distinction between spirituality versus religion. And he said that spirituality is an experience of a connection to something greater than yourself, and it pre-exists religion. So the connection exists independent of religion, and it exists if you're alive, and even sometimes when you're not. A religion is a set of prescribed exercises to develop spirituality. Not always literally exercises, though yoga is not necessarily religious because it actually predates most of the world's religions, but it can develop spirituality by giving you a real-time experience of a deeper connection through its practice. But rituals, scriptures, beliefs, dogma. It's characteristic of religion. So a person, through their spirituality, has experiences which they try and communicate to others. And many of these experiences don't quite translate well if the other person hasn't had the experience. So for example, I was talking, it's really easy as a drug counselor to talk about this with people's drug experiences. And you say, okay, look, since I'm usually talking with adults, you remember when you were like a pre-tweener and with a heterosexual orientation and you thought girls were yucky, right? And so therefore you wouldn't know what an orgasm is, nor could you understand the attraction to the opposite sex, speaking in a heteronormative sense, or same sex, whatever. I'll speak from my experience. Heterosexual, right? So, yeah, you're 8 to 11, girls are yucky. Coffee tastes bad, why would anybody drink beer? Ugh, that's terrible. Then after puberty, boom, it's different, right? Wet dreams to orgasms, to your first kiss, to coffee tastes good, beer tastes good, weed, whatever. What the American basic rites of passage. All right, so you can't explain what an orgasm is to somebody who hasn't had one. You can't explain what the fascination with coffee and beer is if they don't like it. Right? You can't explain what being stoned is to somebody that's only gotten drunk. But once you've gotten stoned, you can't explain what the difference is to somebody that hasn't had the experience. Let alone how LSD trip or a psychedelic trip is different than smoking weed, or ketamine is different than LSD, or various other drugs. Right? So, spiritual experience is like that. If you don't have a referent, okay, and a referent is in psychology a psychological aspect, a psychological object, an experience, a bottle. And so bottles can be made of plastic, metal, glass, chairs, what kind of chair, sofa, couch, table, okay? Tableness, different kinds of tables, so each one is a psychological referent. An orgasm, your experience is a psychological referent, which then you can then transfer to other things. All right? Spiritual experiences. I became one with everything. Well, what do you mean by that? That doesn't make sense. Sounds like you're crazy. Like telling my grandmother, my experience with LSD, I saw God. Boy, you can't see God on LSD. No, Grandma, it's not like, God isn't some white dude in heaven throwing thunderbolts. Well, that's right. Well, Grandpa told me that. Jesus is black. I'm not going to say that God's black. God's beyond color and gender. But I experienced on LSD a universal intelligence that seemed to be coming from things that I normally didn't think were intelligent or sentient. I experienced that. And then what made it real for me is I continued to experience that after the acid was gone. Now, it's hard for me to attribute intelligence to racists, but I realize that's a polarity with me. I got issues, right? I'm paranoid that way against people who try and take away my freedom. But I recognize that that enemy is my ally spiritually. They're another person, they're another human being that's a part of myself. And that's what Yeshua was talking with, love your enemies. And it takes meditative skill to like see that and begin to, okay, I don't have to be afraid of you. I understand why you're afraid of me, but you don't need to be afraid of me because I'm not really your enemy. Your actual enemy is the people that you think that you were looking up to. All right, so a person, back to slide, please, thank you. So a person, through their spirituality, has experiences which they try and communicate to others. Some of these things cannot be expressed in words. So they use parables, metaphors, wordplay. So a religion grows up around these collected sayings, which then begin to be interpreted according to the understanding or motivation of others. Now, what I said the other day about before you have literacy, when Asante is talking about the age of literacy, before you have writing, you have stories and you have language. And you have various other scriptures, and scriptures only possible when you have an oral tradition to write down. Right? Now, Yeshua himself, as we'll get to in parts of his biography, he was illiterate. So who's writing this stuff down? And it is a fact in Western civilization, they will acknowledge that they didn't start writing these Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke till like 50 years after he's dead. And some of the people who knew him, like the Apostle Paul, Paul, right, didn't even meet Jesus. He was in jail during the ministry, and he was a murderer. But he said, oh, let me take this, this new thing to the Romans. Wait, the Romans killed Jesus. Why are you taking this to the Romans? Okay, love your enemy? I don't know. In any case, religion grows up around those collected sayings which then begin to be interpreted according to the understanding and motivation of others. Okay? Limited understanding, or in another way from the spheres of Ra or an Indian yogic frame of view, limited understanding or lower chakra motivation equals narrow interpretation. Okay? Or strictly literal interpretation when the language itself contains multiple interpretations. So for example then, when we talk about the intersection of yoga and Christianity, and what I mean by this is basically saying Christianity itself came out of the Egyptian mystery schools. The light of the body is in the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. But if the eye be evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. How great is that darkness, if therefore the light that is in thee be darkness? How great is that darkness? For darkness fills our hearts. So, in his language, the word for good is ripe fruit. The word for evil is unripe fruit. And they're from the same tree. Right? Which is why in the lines in the Lord's Prayer talk about compost our inner fruit. Like if the fruit's rotten, let's turn it into something useful. But if it's ripe, let it ripen. Now, who ripens fruit? And so part of that teaching, coming from an agricultural, non-literate point of view as he did, he's going to use simple parables and simple everyday words. Good is ripe. Unripe, evil is unripe. Who ripens fruit? You? No, the Spirit. Okay? Now you can see in your enemy where they are ripe and where they are unripe, as you can see the unripe seeds, the seeds of unripeness in yourself. Because your enemy is a reflection of yourself. Right? So you don't actively fight your enemy because, wait, that's me. It's like, should you pluck out your right eye because your left eye is offending you? No. No man can serve two masters, for either will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon means materialism. And again, this is KJV, which is not coming from the original Aramaic, but has been interpreted in a particular way, which could tend to be narrower than an Aramaic point of view. So my grandfather said, look, don't throw away your King James Version of the Bible that we gave you as a kid, but understand that there's a larger, deeper question that's coming out of the African-centered points of view of the religion that are hidden, right? So if Western civilization is based on the narrower perspective, then you can understand, oh, well, right, black people are cursed because Noah's son saw Noah in his bath, and that was black people are the children of Ham, and it was Ham that saw Noah in his bath, and because Ham saw Noah in his bath, all his descendants are cursed, and so that the sign of that curse is their dark skin. And so that's why black people are supposed to serve white people, because white people are made in the image of God, and black people are cursed. Right? So that's what that line. I'm not making that up. That is was actually said in Congress in terms of why we don't free slaves. And why the white man's burden is to basically uplift we won't get to that till next term, but these beliefs, basic from that interpretation of the Bible led to U.S. government and as well as European policy. So part of the intersection of yoga and Christianity. Single eye full of light. What single eye is full of light? The dual eye shall be full of darkness. So seeing duality is basically seeing into the darkness and seeing illusion. You cannot serve God and mammon, so the dual eye where you can see spirituality and you can see materialism and you can't see the underlying unity. That is one way of interpreting those particular lines, or how I interpret those particular lines, because coming out of a Natarian point of view where the Natarians basically say, look, there's social justice. Look, there is nature. Look, the spirit is inseparable from the things that you're seeing. Separation is an illusion. So, the Egyptian mystery schools then produced Christs, anointed ones or winged ones, awakened human beings with creative capacities that appeared magical or godlike to those who were asleep. Sematawi, or yoga, Sematawi is the word for it in Comedian, the union of the upper Egypt and lower Egypt, which is lower Egypt is the body, upper Egypt is the spirit. One way, so those yoga systems were one way of developing, expanding, and maintaining life energy awareness. Osar Mesh, also known as Moses, was an adept of the Egyptian mystery schools. Yeshua was probably another as well, and others, possibly in Turtle Island. Not told about in this story, but for example, the reason I'm often talking about a Christian framework here is because when they say America is a Christian nation, even though many of the founding fathers are going, no, we're not really interested in that, certain people are saying that particular meme to say, well, King James Version of the Bible is our guiding light. Well, okay, but what if you're not that? And what if you're looking at a different point of view? So take, for example, we pray in Jesus' name, which is basically a lot of coming out of a fundamental Christian base. So in his language, Aramaic, Shala Shem, create a prayer to create an opening. Shala, it's prayer, creating an opening. It also means to trap a stance towards life, full of awe. So not to say words, it's silent. In fact, it's silent. And Shem, in my name doesn't literally mean saying Jesus, 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 Jesus. It means rhythm, which implies music or song. Illumination, which basically talks about insight. And atmosphere, breath. So rhythm, the same vibe, illumination, the same insight, the same point of view. Atmosphere, the same pattern of breathing or inspiration. So yeah, we saw that, or that was up in the PowerPoints. It's the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. So I think we can skip that because you've got this already, and we did possible translations already, yes?
And what?
We did possible translations already? So let's skip to here. All right. Describe what you see there.
Some type of artwork,
Okay?
maybe.
Maybe it's actually more mundane than artwork, but yes, it is artistic.
maybe
Sure.
Ancient.
Okay? What gives you the idea it's ancient?
Just how granular it looks like.
Okay, sure.
Kind of the edging. I seen a couple pictures you had before. I saw kind of that same style of edging around, like a work.
Okay. This is a Roman coin. Before the fall, but after they'd converted to Christianity from paganism. Right? So you see the Latin style cross behind him, right? Now, that particular depiction of hairstyle. Not long flowing Michelangelo's uncle.
Like little twisties, little short.
Little
cuts.
twisties, little naps and little knots, however you want to say. Yeah. Okay? Roman coin. So clearly they didn't have issues with race or depicting Jesus as black. Not an issue.
Is that his hands forming that?
I think so, yeah. In the familiar two-handed thing.
Kind
Two
of
fingers,
he's throwing
yeah.
symbols or something.
Yeah, he could be throwing gang signs, I don't know. So, the words of Yahshua to Jesus. So, Yahoshua, Yeshua, Yazus, Jesus. So, Isho, as we call them for short for Yeshua. The Greeks who came to know of him later referred to him as Yazus, or healing Zeus. So in the Latin alphabet, when turn the I from the Greek into J, it was then known as Jesus. Okay, so that's where that came from. Yazus, Jesus. And that's a Roman coin. 300 AD. So, yeah, when I'm saying Jesus is black, I'm quoting white people. Just saying. Okay, so as with pictures of Buddha, depicting his hair in the same manner, tight curls, representing representation of one of many African hairstyles. So, when the Romans killed Isho, it's because he threatened the established religious order. So at the time, at his time, there could have been 200 different sects of Judaism alone. So goddess worshippers, Yahwists, Essenes. Many early Christians were persecuted, of course, by the Romans, and many of those persecuted Christians sought sanctuary among the Romans' enemies, the Persians, part of which we call present-day Iran and Iraq. Okay? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay? The Persians allowed those Christians to practice their religion, and being both an oral and literate people, eventually the words were written down in Aramaic, and this is where the Peshitta comes from. Okay? The Peshitta dates back to 450 AD, 150 years after that coin, and contains Old and New Testaments. And there are a number of Gospels, for example, up to 200 different books that King James editing team edited out, as well as changing words, for example, tyrant into kings, a little more neutral, and physical descriptions, virile and manly in the original Song of Solomon, to white and ruddy. Right? So, Makeda, look at me, you daughters of Jerusalem, for I am black and comely. And my love is virile and manly, but they change it to white and ruddy? No. Not Solomon, I don't think so. Not there. But hey. So Isho spoke Aramaic, not Hebrew, not Greek, and certainly not Latin, though we would have to understand Latin because they were under Roman occupation. So one possible reason we never hear about the Peshitta or even Aramaic is because we've been exposed to the Paulist, Romanized version of Christianity. So Paul never knew Jesus personally. He was a murderer in jail during the ministry who converted later. So how many people did Jesus kill personally? 0. How many armies did Jesus lead? 0. How do you have Christian soldiers? Oh, the Romans. So, there is reason to believe Mary Magdalene would have been Isho's spiritual successor. And certainly was considered called the beloved disciple, and certainly was there at the crucifixion when all the other apostles left or didn't show up, because they would have been killed. They showed up. But she being a woman and Joseph of Arimathea basically, considered a non-combatant, right? So, the Peshitta means original, straight, simple, sincere, and true, the definitive text for the Near East, India, Church of the East, the Roman Catholic Church of the East, in use for 400 years before the Christian Church divided into several sects, like Catholic and Protestant and et cetera, et cetera. So the reason I'm showing you this aspect of Western civilization is it's hidden. I mean, if this is the first time you've seen it, right? So it's available. Now, I was taught this as an 8-year-old with an 8-year-old understanding. Find the words of Jesus, find his original name, find the word in his original language, but Grandpa didn't say anything about Aramaic. But basically said this tradition is what is black liberation theology. So that is, there's a social justice movement. This is what the belief of many people who freed the slaves and believe that. So, for example, I think I have, let me create this quote here. New slide. Insert new slide. Thank you. Go to Word. Here we go. Go back to PowerPoint. Normally Normally I don't compose in the middle of something, right? I think I want to make a point about liberation theology. Again. Between the Christians of the land, he's talking about America, and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. So wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and lovely is of necessity, to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be a friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, hypocritical Christianity of this land. Frederick Douglass. So part of what he's saying is like the original Christianity, the African version, the black Christ, is what he's down with, and that's what guides his activities. And that those that are using the King James Version of the Bible to justify slavery are not practicing Christianity, or they're practicing a version he's not down with. So, the story told became the only story. So, such being the case, what would be, if Mary Magdalene was his chief disciple, what would be the role in the sacred feminine in Isho's religious teachings? So we don't know because we only hear the story from the Romans, not the Persians. So Aramaic Christians never used the gospel as justification for war, slavery, the abuse of women and children, or genocide. In fact, basically, they never participated in the Crusades or any of the stuff the western side of the church has done, to this day. Okay, using the Aramaic text. So I think I have a convincing case that's convinced me anyway. Not that I needed Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, W.E. Du Bois, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, as all people who believe that Jesus was black. So there have been people who've taken issue with me, even black people who've taken issue with me for taking that stance. Wait, I'm down with Du Bois and Douglass. You're not? They hate me for that kind of stuff. Anyway, so we've come to believe that the Roman story of Christianity is the only story. So just like Columbus discovered America. So you can find Isho's views about the sacred feminine in the Aramaic traditions, as well as some of the so-called Gnostic Gospels, particularly those attributed to Miriam of Magdala, where she basically says this is what the Trinity is: Mother, Father, and the child of true humanity. So, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Isho says, you suffer because you love what deceives you. And the way out of suffering, paraphrasing the rest of the lines that follow that one, the way out of suffering is to understand why and how you are suffering and loose the chains binding you. Actually, that's straight out of the Lord's Prayer, too. Yeah.
And it all keeps going back to the concept of self-mastery.
Yes, right.
Which self
Right.
getting rid
That's
of
why I can draw a clear course from Unitarianism into this. It's straight out of the same older tradition. There is a sacred feminine. You listen to female teachers. And so Christianity would have actually taken a different turn had she been allowed to be the spiritual successor rather than the boys. Now, she did live to be like 90 years old in some, for example, Catholics say that. where she died in France or something like that. So I think we did talk about this thing of Aramaic on Monday, yes? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll leave it in. Yes, here we go. So he's the son of Israel. So he was steeped in a culture, the nation of Israel, I'll call it, whether in bondage or free or sovereign or conquered, that arose out of an African context and was therefore influenced by other Africans. And I'm talking about the nation of Israel. In fact, all that biblical stuff in the Old Testament is basically the adventures of people of color in an African context. So even if we understand that Christianity arose out of Judaism and all of its teachings were already a part of Judaism, we still need to understand key concepts of that culture that are in effect today. Number one being Jews didn't back then and still don't believe in a hell. Two, Jews didn't then and still don't believe in a devil. So, yes, kingdom of heaven existed. Yes, there was evil in the world. Okay? There was not a deity, a fallen archangel, capable of nullifying God's will on earth. So their basic belief, even in the 200 different sects of Judaism, right? Goddess worshippers and all the other folks. Okay? No devil, no hell. So God was supreme on earth. Ye shall have no other gods before me. Okay? So you can't have a fallen archangel able to influence humans. Evil exists, but it exists in you. Right? So Jews did not and do not proselytize necessarily or recruit people into their religion. Okay, all of these are features of Christianity. So where did they get all that? Right? So Isha was a Jew in the sense of cultural identification in terms of being part of a larger culture, but you have to understand that term Jew actually came from the Romans. So it's basically Judea, which is like calling, are you an Oregonian or are you an American? You go to Europe, are you an American or an Oregonian? You're an American, right? So Judea was like a state in the nation of Israel, which then later became a commonly applied term to one particular dominant faction, just like Christians sought to take all the multiplicity of all these doctrines and just boil it down into one. Same movement happened within Judaism several different times. So, for example, Semitic languages. There are 4 Semitic languages. Then the sisters, Hebrew, Arabic, Amharic, Aramaic. Or you can think of the acronym A. Aramaic, Amharic, Arabic, and Hebrew. So, the story, this is out of Joseph Chilton's book. So Chilton is a Jesuit, and he's basically talking about, well, we Catholics have been responsible for lots of persecution of Jews, but nobody's really examined Jesus' message as a Jew, like he's a Jew. So he was steeped in that culture. We need to understand that, right? So Mary was 13 and pregnant with Isha when she met Joseph, who was a widower with children. So Jews didn't, therefore, and don't – also believe in the virgin birth thing. No. He was a mamzer, which means, in their language, Mary, you got knocked up by somebody. And you're not naming the father. So it's either incest or rape. Because you can't name the father for whatever reasons. But you got knocked up. So, because he's a mamzer, that is a person of questionable parentage, the product of rape or incest, he was not allowed to go to Hebrew school in his own village of Bethlehem. Nor even enter the temple in his village for his father's funeral. So Joseph became dead for all intents and purposes, and Jesus apprenticed with Joseph as a carpenter, which at the time meant not just working with wood, but basically building people's houses where the walls were made of stone, the door was wood, but the roofs were thatched. So that meant repairing all of it. So carpenter is not, you're also a stone cutter too. So Jesus learned that trade with Joseph. Joseph dies when he's 18, and he can't even go to the funeral because in his own temple, he can't go into the temple because everybody knows he's not actually Joseph's kid. Therefore, he doesn't go to Hebrew school. Therefore, he doesn't learn to write in Hebrew. So the early Gospels are written down by one of Joseph's kids, James. So that's why there's no Gospel of Jesus, because he didn't write. But he could listen, being steeped in an oral tradition, and be able to debate. All right? So he couldn't write, and that's why there's no Gospels composed by him. So he'd be illiterate, but at least in Hebrew, but could and would speak, teach, compose, pun, and parable in Aramaic. Because the brother got a rat, and he's part of a culture that's, oral, and you got to be quick-witted and be able to break things down for folks. So, for example, the parable of the sower, right, where he's basically talking about the word of God as a seed, and you throw out the seed, and let's see, sometimes the seed falls on rocks and gets lost, and sometimes it falls on fertile ground and sprouts, and sometimes it's laying around and the birds are picking it off, but some places so what he's talking about is the condition of the human heart. If your heart's hard, you hear the word, it's just going to sit there and get lost. If it's fertile ground, your heart is soft and open and ripe and fertile, ripe meaning good, right? Fertile, then the word sprouts immediately. If your mind is like a bird, that is, it's jumping around like birds do, you pick up the word and you're just not focused. Right? So he's talking about multiple layers and levels, not just literal birds, not just literal casting of seeds. And that's built into the language, so you can interpret it in multiple levels. You can do that without reading, because it's already built into the language. All right, so Allah, sacred unity, the one before whom there are no others. Ruach, Holy Spirit, breath, which is also found in wind and waters, hence baptism and living water. So, for example, with Cousin John. So you'll notice in the lineage of Matthew and Luke, when Matthew and Luke in KJV starts with all those begats, begat, 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 all the way back to David and Solomon. What they're trying to do is establish a lineage that makes him legitimate. But that lineage is figured through Elizabeth, who's Mary's sister, and Elizabeth is the mom of John the Baptist. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, we got legitimate roots on mom's side, we don't know who dad is. So we made up the story about, divine virgin birth, which Jews themselves don't believe in. So what I'm saying is, this story got transferred from culture to a culture. Christianity did come out of Judaism. His teachings did come out of, for example, Cousin John, who believed that Holy Spirit was in living water, and that you baptize yourself every day because you have a relationship with nature, right? So you have to cleanse yourselves of sin every day by baptizing yourself in water, which means we're talking the Jordan River, which is snow melt in the desert, So yeah, dip yourself in that in snow melt in the morning. Yeah, you feel alive, you feel reborn, and you might be sinning during the day, so you better repeat the process the next morning, right? Not just once for birth and that's it. Okay, baptism, right? Ena, ena, are also known as I and I, the phrase translated in the singular pronoun every time Isho speaks. So little I is me, the big I is Allah. And variously, simultaneously, me and God, you and I, we, all of us in unity. I and the Father are one. Let thy I become single. All that. Kishuka, below conscious awareness, like unconscious. Visha, evil, unripe fruit. This is where you hit when you miss the mark. Actually, when you talk about sin, the word for sin in Aramaic is kata. It's an archery term. You miss the mark, try again. Keep missing, keep practicing. Tuf, ripe fruit. So, evil is unripe fruit, good is ripe fruit. Satana, this is the word that's often been mistranslated, where we get the concept of Satan, the evil archangel, who seems to be a combination of the trident of Shiva and Pan, the goat god, etc., etc. And Satana literally means adversary, that which distracts us from the unity. Like a similar concept in Islam, the Great Jihad, when Muhammad, peace be unto him, speaks about the Great Jihad, basically that's an inner battle. Spiritual turmoil, duality, fragmentation of light and dark. Original sin is duality of something you like and something you don't like. So the battle between polarities in your consciousness. So Satana, get thee behind me, Satana. And I can actually show you this, where this comes from in Egyptian framework, where Horus is doing battle with Set. And Set is an imaginary creature that's basically congruent or equivalent to your ego. So if Jews don't believe in a devil externally or a hell, what Satana is literally your ego. In Islam, they refer to nafs, which is your ego. And there's like 7 different kinds of nafs, 7 different kinds of ego. Righteous, spiritual, religious ego. I'm righteous, you're not. I'm doing good deeds, you're not. I'm better than you. So ego. And this is what you're supposed to fight in the Great Jihad. Yourself. Your ego. So how much easier is it to basically find the problem in others? The lesser jihad. And Muhammad said that. The Great Jihad is fought against yourself. Against Satana or nafs. And Yeshua was saying the same thing, but earlier. Yeah, Eddie.
It's what you just said. Originally, jihad is basically self-purification.
Yeah.
Spiritually.
Yeah, it's a spiritual battle. Also fought with the breath, Holy Spirit, or baraka, or blessing. So let's see, that's a repeat of the slide. So the same preposition in Hebrew and Aramaic means within and among. So the kingdom of heaven is within you and among your community, in the all my relations sense. So love the Lord with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. So, and I think this is a repeat of what I had said earlier, but just as an underscore. So your name is what your mama gave you, and that name, for example, was Yeshua, which means the supreme God, Yah, or Jah, Shua, saves or restores. Or Isho for short. Yeshua Nazarete Rexius Israel, to underscore that. So, this is part of a hidden history of Western civilization. So basically saying just what I said, but I'll leave it up as a slide. Healing Zeus. So in the Council of Nicaea, the African and Asian branches of the church, so Asian branches including China, thank you, 2 minutes, got gathered in what was considered Christendom and determined what was going to be Christian doctrine. So part of the decision was to make Jesus the only begotten Son of God, and that kings like the Caesar, Kaiser, the Tsar were going to be Christ's earthly representatives. The African and Asian churches were not down with this decision, saying that Yeshua was a man, a master teacher, and others could be like him, like he taught. But the Romans basically said, no, we need instead of all these different doctrines, we need a single truth to teach people so that they can be aligned with that, and we're going to basically be in line with creating a government on earth to control people, because we figured out military conquest doesn't work unless you have people thinking and worshiping all the same way, and that's what we're going to do. Catholic means universal. All right? So this is what we're going to take around the world. And y'all in Asia and Africa, later. We're not down with that. Yeah.
It's like a conscious form of indoctrination.
Yeah, pretty much. And you can see by, creating crusades and stuff like that, they're okay with warfare and all the other things that come out of the western side of the church that weren't in the eastern side or the original teachings. So that then that pattern gets laid down early at the Council of Nicaea, and that becomes part of the basis of Western civilization, where the short answer is the Roman Empire falls, reconstitute the Roman Empire, we need a glue using a weaponized form of Christianity as the glue to hold it together, and doctrines that support kings, nobles, and then everybody else. This will be up later. Have a good week.
You gain all of your like